Alright, here we go. We're going to be talking about volumetric fog. I think for this one the audio should be a lot better than what it was before, because I fixed a few things. I'm guessing this should be alright. Let's see. The volumetric fog we're going to be creating looks like this. So you can see it's completely volumetric. You can fly around it, walk around it. It has... Alright, so it has... it's fully volumetric. And as you can see, it also respects shadows. You can see that's a volumetric shadow right there. Looks like a triangle. But you'll see it better. Just ignore the character right here. This is just a test character. It's just a blocking character. It has nothing to do with what we're showing here. So let's see if you can see. You can see the shadows there from the volume, and you'll see it in different times as well, depending on the lighting. And then just taking a look at of how we did this. It's actually quite simple. There are a lot of tutorials already out there on how to create volumetric fog, and we're just going to be adding a little bit of difference, because as you can see, they're actually moving. You can see it's creating almost like a little sphere shape there, and then here, the ones here on the ground look a little bit more wispy. So this is what we're going to be creating. Those are actually meant to be viewed from a bit further away and not so close. Well, that was the idea. Anyway, these are supposed to be. Now, if you move away, they have a natural, not natural. I've set LODs in these effects. That's why they'll disappear after a specific distance or whatever. But if you just enter in game mode, in just flying around in the editor, it'll respect the settings that you use in your atmospheric fog. That's all well documented. Exponential height fog. It will use these values here: density, height fall off, and then there's also a volumetric, these settings here obviously, and then the view distance. So I've set this up very, very high. But my LOD, my fog effect will cut off before that, because I've actually set the draw distance in the let's see. I've actually set the draw distance here. Oh, it's actually the same. It looks like it's 100,000 for far clouds. I think these will be closer, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that's the same. That one's clipping at 50. Anyway, so I'm just going to show how I did these quickly, and then here's one that's got a different color, but it's also still volumetric. You can move around in it, and as you see, it's not always facing you, like a 2D image that's always facing you. Which is what you usually, or how you would usually do this. Alright. Like I said, these tutorials there are plenty of them out there. So this technique is nothing new. But this wispy, this is something I've added using my own thing, and so we'll cover that quickly. So let's start by going to, start in a new folder here. I'm going to start by creating a new material. Right, so after creating let's create a new material. So I'll just call this volumetric fog 1. You need to set the domain to volume and the blend mode to additive. Right. Then let's start by getting the absolute world position. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to just hook it up to the emissive color. For starters, you'll see for volume you're working with albedo and extinction and emissive. And then let's create a new particle system. I'm going to call this fog. So we'll make this use this volumetric fog material here. I'm going to set the spawn just to 1, the lifetime to leave it at 1 second. Initial size just static at 1500. I'm leaving those other two at 0 because we've made this PSA square, so it's only going to use the X anyway. Initial velocity, I'm just going to make this about between 30 and 10 for the Z, and then color over life I'm just simply going to delete. And then I'm going to drag the effect out into the world here. Alright, then just make sure you obviously save the material. And then you should start seeing the effect I'm looking for. So this is just simply plugging in the absolute world position into the emissive color. So what absolute world position does is it provides the position of the current pixel in world space. So this is obviously the position of the material applied to this particle. So if I were to start firing, let's add a cylinder in here. And so it's spawning these particles, and then this material here is simply showing all the pixels that would have been enveloped by this particle, because the particle itself has no, it doesn't have anything, but it does have a size. But there isn't actually physically something there. So if I bring this down to 500, this is going to get smaller. So it's basically a sphere of 500 that's getting intersected here. That's intersecting with the geometry. So you should see the bottom half here, because it's also doing a depth test. It obviously won't render stuff that's behind something else, because that's obviously what the shader is supposed to do. Okay, so now what we want is, we're not going to be using this emissive color, but this is what absolute world position does. It gives you the absolute world position of a pixel in world space, the absolute world position of a pixel that this material will affect. And so the particle is emitting an origin based on this location here, the cylinder, and then it has a size, which is basically like a radius, right? So it's emitting a sphere, which is what you would expect for a particle system. So we're going to be using a thing called a sphere mask. Once again, this is nothing new. This has been done to... You can find a lot of tutorials on this. Okay, but what a sphere mask does is the value that you put in A must be the pixels that it must check against. the value that you put in B is going to be the origin of the sphere. So I'm using particle position world space. So that's the origin of the center point of the sphere, and then the pixels here are the check. So if there are overlapping pixels from here based on the radius and the feather or hardness setting here, if the sphere overlaps any of these pixels, it will mask them, meaning they'll be included in this operation coming out here. That's how I understand it. So the first thing I want to include here is I want to include the particle radius, because we get that as well. And then all I'm going to do is I'm just going to hook this up to extinction and just see the effect. Okay, we're going to set the albedo here to 1. Let's make this a parameter. Let's make the default value 1 because I don't like the black. And then you can see it's very hard, but there is something that is interesting here to notice right off the bat. It is already volumetric because of the shader. This is because of the volume shader, not necessarily the particle shader. This is what we're going to be using to create this volume. So for the albedo, you can obviously play with these values. It'll give you a darker or a brighter shade of something. Hooking this up to the emissive can also work, and then you're going to get an emissive kind of fog. But we'll see what happens when we start adding the extinction properly. So the next step that I want to do is I want to put the cylinder back here. I'm going to increase the spawn rate to 35 and the lifetime between 5 and 6 seconds. And let's move back a little bit. So you can see the cloud that we're creating here. It's very similar to this cloud here. One of these. These are a couple working together. It's not just one. It's very similar to this. But then you'll see distinct differences here. First of all, these are they've got seriously hard edges. You can see some aliasing there. So they've got really hard edges. It doesn't look like fluffy and cute or whatever. So we need to soften this up a little bit. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to multiply in an extinction scalar parameter. I'm going to start with the value of 0.01. If I can type. And we'll move that to extinction and save. Update the material. And now you can see it's already started getting much softer. But there's also another thing you notice now. There's a big difference here. These here are quite wispy, where these aren't. And that's quite simple because those are using a trick that I'm going to show you here. Once again, like I said, there's a lot of different ways to do this tutorial to get moving or fog that doesn't just look like it's static. There are a lot of other ways to do this, but this is the way that I chose to do it. So I'm going to start off by using a noise texture. Just using tNoise01. This comes from the engine. It's part of the engine. You'll find it in Unreal Engine if you include star content. Or it might just be part of the engine. I don't know. I always include starter content because there's a lot of useful stuff in there. Right, so then the next thing I want to do is I'm going to use a panner. Let's hook that up to this guy. And I'm just going to make it pan really slowly. I don't think you're going to be able to see this. Okay, cool. So you can see it. That's quite cool. Right, so that's the idea there. It's just something to break up the monotonous look of the particle of the fog, because this is really boring. It's not really doing much, and that looks a lot better. That it's got that wispy feel to it. You can also control the speed here if you just expose this as a parameter, but I'm not going to do that. And then all you need is something to march the panner forward to update the panner each tick or whatever frame. So using time there, and then we're just going to multiply this in. See the difference? Yeah, that's the one I wanted. So add is going to make it look a lot thicker, but you could also probably do that by just introducing another scalar in here to control the thickness. But that's what the extinction is for, really. So I mean, if you bring up the extinction here to 0.1 or 0.05, you can get a thicker fog. So I leave it at 0.01. Now the next thing is the color. So just let's run this. You can walk through this or whatever, and you can duplicate these guys. And I don't know why they're not showing up here in the render stats, whatever you call this view. I'm not sure if it's got to do with the pass in which it happens, or if it really is that cheap just to render it, that it's negligible. I don't know. I'm guessing I probably need to enable something to view the performance of it, but you'll see it's very negligible. And I have quite a lot of fog happening everywhere. But yeah, so this is the volumetric fog. So let's introduce color. So what I'm going to do for that is quite easy, really. There's two ways to do it that I like. The first one is you use a dynamic parameter here, and then you build up a float 3 or 4. Probably a float 3, you don't need a float 4. And then you multiply this into your albedo, and that goes into your extinction. And then this dynamic parameter here, you just introduce a dynamic parameter here. Now the problem with this, which I don't like, is it's always float values. So this one works, but then you have to set 3 floats, and you can't pick and choose the color, use a color picker, but it does work. And I almost never use it. So what I prefer to do is I'll use a vector parameter here and just expose it, and then multiply this in, and then let's start with white. And then what we can do is we can just create a material instance. And then on the fog we'll use the instance. And then you could create different instances for different colors if you wanted. So that's another way, which I actually prefer. I prefer this way versus the dynamic parameters. I don't like dynamic parameters. I never have. They just seem a bit clunky to me, but they're useful. They're very useful for talking between particles and materials. And then you can also obviously talk to your blueprints can talk to or your code can talk to your materials, and then your materials can talk to your particles. Well, you could also talk to your particles directly in C++, I guess. It's not that difficult. But I'm just saying you know, for something quick and easy, or quick and easier, this is pretty cool. So you can get like some nice sandy dust or whatever going pretty quickly. And this is literally how long it took to create it. As long as I took this video, and it's been under, under half an hour or whatever it is. I had to cut a few times, so I think that's going to be it. This wasn't the craziest tutorials ever, but yeah, thanks for watching.